Appropriateness.
Order. Good afternoon, members, and welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Northern Ireland Assembly's Public Accounts Committee. Members, can I just at the outset advise that mobile phones must be set to airplane mode or turned off. It's not sufficient to put mobiles on silent mode as they continue to interfere with the Assembly recording. The session is being recorded in video and audio and can be accessed live via online streaming on the Assembly website or Democracy Live. Agenda item 1 is apologies. I have apologies from Mr Irwin and Mr McHugh. Any others? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 2 then is the minutes of the meeting of the 21st of October, last week being a recess week, that are in your pack, pages 8 to 13. Are members content that these are accurate, and do I have your permission to sign them as being accurate? Read. Okay. Agenda item 3 is declaration of interests. I declare at the outset that I am a governor of the Girls Model Secondary School in Belfast and Edenbrook Primary School. Mr Begg.
Declaring interest as a governor of Rodensvale School in Larne and a member of Horizon Sure Start.
Declaring an interest as a governor of Clay Primary School.
Mr Muir.
Member of the Board of Governors of Priory Integrated College in Holywood.
Okay, thank you. Members, have we any matters arising from the minutes? None? Okay. Agenda item 5 then is correspondence, which the corresponds pages 17 to 27 of your pack. We're delighted this afternoon to welcome Mr Rodney Allen to the meeting, the Chief Operating Officer of Northern Ireland Law Office, Mr Kyle Bingham, and also Mr Allen, the other Mr Allen, and Mr McCants. You're very welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chairman.
Members, I refer to correspondence dated the 26th of October 2021, pages 17 to 18 in your pack, from Mr Daniel Keane, Chairperson of the Windwatch Northern Ireland, and Mr Owen McMullen, Chairperson of West Tyrone against wind turbines. The correspondence is in regard to our inquiry into generating electricity from renewable energy. The clerk has been in touch with Dr Kane and Mr McMullen, informing them that our report has been completed. However, the MOR is due on the 18th of November this year. Members, Dr Kane and Mr McMullen have raised a number of questions regarding the inquiry and would like to request that we are kept informed of the ongoing investigations into the 9.3 million issued by Invest Northern Ireland to anaerobic digestion plant. They've also asked who will implement the recommendations of our report. Excuse me. Are you content that we write back to Dr Kane and Mr McMullen to explain that the process of implementation and the recommendations and advise them a memorandum of response? First of all, members, you agree that we do that? Agreed. Rodney, on some other issues, do you have any comments particularly around the anaerobic digestion plant, or are you content?
We're content, Chairman. We're happy to take this away and keep considering it as you work through your remaining stages of the process on your report, or the memorandum of response, I should say, whenever it comes through. We can compare it back to the report. We're also starting, this links very closely with work that we're starting to do in the whole area of climate change, which is exceptionally topical, as you'll appreciate.
Okay, so members, can I then ask you as a committee, that are you content that we ask Rodney and his colleagues to carry out their own investigation and report back to the committee in due course, and we can also advise Dr Kate and Mr McMullen of this action? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Mr Allen is nodding in agreement, so I take it that's agreement from the Audit Office. Members, I refer to the correspondence dated the 26th of October 2021, pages 19 to 20 in your pack, from Dr Mark Bryan, the Accounting Officer and Permanent Secretary, Department of Education, about attending a further evidence session on closing the gap inquiry on the 2nd of December. Are you content that we discuss this under agenda item 9, the forward draft work programme? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Members, I refer to correspondence from the Audit Committee dated the 29th of October 2021 that is in your packs, pages 21 to 27, regarding the Northern Ireland Audit Office draft report in 2022 to 2025. The Audit Committee is responsible for scrutinising and agreeing the annual estimate from the Northern Ireland Audit Office, brackets NIAO, and in doing so, the committee also scrutinises the Northern Ireland Audit Office budget plan, as they are any agreed budget will underpin the estimate for the following year. The Audit Committee gave an oral evidence on the 3rd of November 2021 from the Northern Ireland Audit Office on the budget plan for that period. A written briefing has been submitted by the Northern Ireland Audit Office in advance of the oral evidence session, a copy of which is in your pack in terms of correspondence. So the table of page 25 of your pack sets out the 3-year budget required for resource costs 2022-25, and table 2, pages 27, outline the 3-year budget plan for 2022-2025 for capital cost. The Audit Committee has requested views from the PAC on the Northern Ireland Office budget plan by noon on November the 19th. So I have to ask the question, do any members have any comments on the NIAO's budget position? None? Members have any, if you have any questions for Rodney around that, or his team? None? Okay, can I therefore ask, are members content to write to the Audit Committee stating that the PAC is content with this approach, but that it is kept updated on the final budget outcome and associated timelines? Agreed?
Agreed. Thank you, members.
Okay, members, I refer to correspondence in your table pack dated the 2nd November 2021 from Mr. Andrew Trimble, Executive Chair of the Renewable Heat Association. It includes an open letter and an antidote to climate change to the First and Deputy First Ministers, and a report of the environmental and economic analysis into the impact of RHI options. Members content to note?
Agreed.
Okay. Members, we will continue in open session to hear evidence regarding our inquiry into closing the gap, social deprivation and educational attainment. Before we formally go into this session, can I just update the committee that this morning, 9 o'clock, Mr. Beggs, Mr. Muir and I visited the Boys Model in North Belfast, and we met with the principal and the vice principals of the school, and we're hugely impressed at how the TSN funding is being spent on relevant projects to tackle targeting social need. This is an example, I think, of good practice which I hope we can capture in our report and share the learning from the visit. I did, and I declare an interest as a former pupil of the school, I did very much push for the visit to happen, not because I'm a former pupil or because it's in my constituency, but it is a school which is actually a school which is delivering around these issues. And I'll let other colleagues who were there come in a moment, but I think what was very interesting was that in terms of the issues of funding, early intervention, leadership, and the lack of joined upness across government, all of these were issues that came up this morning from the principal and her senior management colleagues. And so therefore, before I ask Mr. Muir and Mr. Beggs to come in to add any points they would wish to, I would say that the principal, Mrs. Montgomery, is actually part of Dr. Purdy's team, and you will hear exactly the sort of leadership we heard this morning as we have our presentation and ask questions of them this afternoon. But it really is an excellent school doing excellent work in some very difficult circumstances. So what I would like the committee to agree is, if you're happy enough, that an extended caption of the visit this morning will go out, basically saying that we had a visit, including some photographs. So could the committee agree with that? Agree that, please?
Great.
Okay. Now, I'll bring in Mr. Beggs first and Mr. Muir in relation to the visit, and then we'll move on to hearing our witnesses.
I agree with the Chair has said, that we were given evidence of very effective use of TSN funding to raise attainment from those in more disadvantaged backgrounds, and in particular evidence of their academic achievements at the school, of how they were exceeding that which would be attained in other schools in similar situations. There's a lot of things going well here, involvement with the community, looking after health and well-being. Again, we were in a well-being class for Year 8. It does seem to be a very rounded school, looking after the needs of the local community. And another aspect that we learned was it has delegated its SEN funding, so it could be making more effective use and support for those pupils in particular as well.
Smear.
Yeah, thank you. Just want to thank the clerks for arranging the visit and for the school for accommodating us. I thought it was very useful examples of good practice. The TSN funding wasn't being viewed as a top-up, but it was actually being specifically spent around identified areas. So the two takeaways for me were the need for improved support and mentoring and leadership support for leadership throughout schools of Northern Ireland, because people join these schools as teachers, and before you know it, they're chief administrator and finance officer, and that's perhaps sometimes not the best use of the person's skills, but they do need to be supported in doing that. But we always take into account that the buck stops with them in terms of financial spend and HR issues. So that's one key area, and it's also about that sort of leadership support, and not through. There's lots of different training available through the Education Authority. A portion of it is online, and my own experience of that is it's not great. We need to be looking at bespoke that's going to help. But the class we visited just before we left, the most important thing for me was that was part of the timetabled schooling during the day, rather than it being something that's after school where you're encouraging people to attend. And if we're going to have young people leaving school, yes, we want to leave them with good academic qualifications, but they also need those skills and those life skills to go forward. And I think we're missing that really in Northern Ireland. And this was an example where they were trying to encourage and teach around emotional resilience and those things, which frankly is what people look for when they're applying for jobs and interviews and assessment centres, and also just generally in life to enable people to succeed. So I think that was really good, and the links with the community as part of that probably brought authenticity to what was occurring.
Okay, so with your agreement, members, can I suggest that we do put out an extended caption, but also agree that a letter is sent to the school thanking them for the visit and the hospitality extended. They even gave us breakfast. So, well, for me it was breakfast anyway.
Don't write that down.
That was one tea.
Don't record that. Yeah. But agreed, Chair, agreed.
So, at this point then, that having been said, could I ask that Mr. Dr. Noel Purdy, Director of the Centre for Research and Educational Underachievement at Stranmillis College, Joyce Logue, Principal Long Tower Primary School, Mary Montgomery, Principal of Boys Model School, Belfast, Ms. Kathleen O'Hare, Retired Principal of Hazelwood Integrated College and former Principal of St Celia's College in Londonderry, and Dr. Jackie Redpath, MBE, Chief Executive of the Greater Shankill Partnership, be brought into the meeting. Can you hear us all okay? Dr. Purdy, Ms. Logue, Ms. Montgomery, Ms. O'Hare and Dr. Redpath, can you hear us okay? Not yet. No. While we're waiting for that, Mr. Stevenson, can you hear us okay?
Good afternoon, Chair. I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Dr. Purdy, can you and your team hear us okay?
Going so well.
Yeah.
Okay, members, what I'm going to do at this stage, if you're happy enough, is we'll have a short adjournment until we establish a link with Stranmillis College. I think the team are meeting at Stranmillis College and are joining us remotely until we establish that. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, members, order. Apologies for this slight and short interruption to our meeting. Our adjournment has now ended, and we're delighted to have with us this afternoon Dr. Noel Purdy, Director of the Centre for Research and Education Underachievement at Stranmillis College, Joyce Logue, Principal of Long Tower Primary School, Mary Montgomery, Principal of the Boys Model School, Kathleen O'Hare, retired Principal of Hazelwood Integrated College and former Principal of St Celia's College in Londonderry, and Dr. Jackie Redpath, MBE, Chief Executive of the Greater Shankill Partnership. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased that we've now established the link. And what I would do at this stage is just welcome you to our inquiry this afternoon into closing the gap, social deprivation and educational attainment. And at this juncture, I'd like to invite Dr. Purdy and colleagues to make a presentation to the committee, and then after you've made your presentation, which hopefully will be about 10 minutes long, although we'll not be absolutely prescriptive on that, then we'll take, hopefully you'll take some questions. Okay?
Yes, thank you, Chair, for your welcome and your invitation to come to the Public Accounts Committee to tell you more about the work and recommended actions of the expert panel on educational underachievement in Northern Ireland. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce myself and my fellow panel members. I'm Dr. Noel Purdy, Director of the Centre for Research and Educational Underachievement here at Stranmillis University College. And my fellow panel members were and are Joyce Logue, Principal of Long Tower Primary School in Derry, Londonderry, Mary Montgomery, Principal of Belfast Boys Model School, Kathleen O'Hare, former Principal of St Cecilia's College in Derry, Londonderry and Hazelwood College in Belfast, Jackie Redpath, Chief Executive of the Greater Shankill Partnership. As you're aware, we began our work in September 2020, thereby fulfilling a new decade new approach commitment to establish an expert group to examine the links between persistent educational underachievement and socioeconomic background, and draw up an action plan for change that will ensure all children and young people, regardless of background, are given the best start in life. We published our final report and action plan entitled A Fair Start on the 1st of June of this year, and we were delighted to note that the report was endorsed by both the Education Minister at the time, Peter Weir, and all 5 parties of the Northern Ireland Executive. We have subsequently met with the new Education Minister, Michelle McAlveen, and her senior officials, and we've been encouraged by her strong support to see the Fair Start report implemented. It was an enormous privilege for all of us to work on this important area of policy. Educational underachievement is a cross-cutting issue which spans multiple departments, multiple policy areas, and multiple disciplines. Our review of educational underachievement and the many issues which impact upon it has shown us just how many factors are at play during the educational journey of a child. We had to consider each of the various factors as we listened, discussed, and debated the issues with the hundreds of stakeholders that we met. I'd like to pay thanks to those individuals, policymakers, public representatives, teachers, school leaders, business representatives, children and young people, families, parents and carers, whose input to this process was truly invaluable. As a consequence of our evidence gathering, we developed our report and action plan covering 8 key areas. First of all, redirecting the focus to early years. 2, championing emotional health and well-being. 3, ensuring the relevance and appropriateness of curriculum and assessment. 4, promoting a whole community approach to education. 5, maximising boys' potential. 6, driving forward teachers' professional learning. 7, supporting the professional learning and well-being of school leadership. And finally, ensuring interdepartmental collaboration and delivery. We believe each of these areas play an important part in helping to address educational underachievement, but they don't exist in isolation. Each area builds on the next. Together, we believe this action plan will make a demonstrable improvement in children and young people's learning outcomes. So first key area 1, redirecting the focus to early years. We believe that the action in this key area will result in a noticeable improvement in children being ready to start school. Parents and families will be more knowledgeable about their child's development and how to support it, and there will be a clear and seamless developmental pathway available to all children from birth to 4 years of age, which will provide a vital basis for the foundation stage of the Northern Ireland curriculum. In order to deliver on these outcomes, our recommended actions include more support for preterm babies, since we know the health and education outcomes for preterm children are not always as positive as their peers. A review of Sure Start staffing to ensure access to appropriate health professionals. A development programme for all 2-year-olds at risk of poor educational outcomes. Standardising the length of the preschool day and an adequately resourced and supported early years workforce. These are just some of the 13 actions in this important policy area. The investment here is significant, ranging from £6 million initially to almost £50 million per annum within 5 years. Key area 2, championing emotional health and well-being. We believe change in this area will mean that children and young people will be provided with effective emotional health and well-being support in a more bespoke and timely manner than ever before. There will be a marked improvement in children's attitudes to their own emotional health and well-being, and more investment in nurture provision will have a substantially positive impact on schools, pupils and families. The recommended actions include supporting the emotional health and well-being framework and gradual expansion of nurture groups over the next number of years, reaching up to 100 settings in the longer term. Investment in this area ranges from £2 to £6 million per annum in the medium to long term. Key area 3, ensuring the relevance and appropriateness of curriculum and assessment. This key area will provide increased support for teachers in delivering the Northern Ireland curriculum. Increased emphasis on a play-based curriculum at foundation stage, more consistent assessment at key stages 1 to 3 through development of SIA's new diagnostic tools, implementation of a Northern Ireland system evaluation framework, which will help to overcome concerns regarding how data is used and reported, improvements in the 14 to 19 policy and sixth form policy, and increased investment in digital devices and broadband for specific learners. These actions represent investment of £2 million in the short term to over £3 million per annum in the longer term. Key area 4, promoting a whole community approach to education. You'll be aware of the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, and this theme was apparent throughout our work. For that reason, this area will provide seamless pathways from early years to young adulthood, bespoke to the area in which children live. Families will be more involved in their children's learning. The development of strategic level programmes with funding to match will provide more certainty for delivery agents, and schools will be encouraged to look at new and innovative methods of curriculum delivery, which motivate and encourage learners at risk of underachievement. The actions here include a review of free school meals as a measure of deprivation, a new £10 million per annum Reducing Educational Disadvantage, or RED programme, which requires communities and schools to work together using a place-based approach, and the development of effective collaborative models for curriculum delivery across both school and youth settings. Key area 5, maximising boys' potential. Factors that concern educators of boys include academic attainment, a lack of interest in studying, higher incidence of behavioural issues, bullying and exclusion, fewer accessing higher education, as well as increased mental health and anxiety issues in boys. However, we acknowledge that a number of these factors can also be a concern for girls. We've outlined 8 actions here which we believe will make a significant difference to educating boys and supporting their learning. These include developing and educating an engaging boys toolkit, developing effective practice for teacher professional learning around understanding boys and facilitating access to high quality restorative practice in schools, and funding collaboration between statutory and voluntary youth services and schools in the most disadvantaged Protestant working class areas. Investment in these areas grows from £0.8 million per annum to £1.5 million per annum within 5 years. Key areas 6 and 7, driving forward teachers' professional learning and supporting the professional learning and well-being of school leadership. These 2 areas are critical to the delivery of the 47 actions within our action plan. We as a panel felt that it was important to highlight the central role played by school teachers and school leaders in addressing educational underachievement, as well as the role of school leaders and the fact that they need more support both in developing to become a school leader and after their appointment as school leaders. Actions include investment of £500,000 per annum in high-quality teacher professional learning frameworks, £0.5 million to building leadership capacity at all levels, and new professional qualifications for leadership, additional investment in the Irish medium sector of £500,000 per year, and a call for employing authorities to work with governing bodies to improve the efficiency, effectiveness and consistency of the recruitment and selection of school principals. Finally, key area 8, ensuring interdepartmental collaboration and delivery. We as a panel felt that this action plan must be monitored at the highest level of government, involving First Minister and Deputy First Minister, thereby requiring all relevant departments to report in a complete, timely and accurate manner on its outworkings. In conclusion, we believe that the actions set out in A Fair Start are capable of making a significant, long-lasting impact on children's learning now and for the foreseeable future. However, this can only be achieved if we invest appropriately and significantly in education for the long term, hence the relevance to today's discussion. As a panel, we fully recognise the magnitude of the challenge in addressing the underlying causes of social disadvantage, the intractability of many of the issues facing families living in disadvantaged circumstances, and the need for systemic change in education to be considered by the recently appointed Review of Education. But we are also convinced that the impact of the actions proposed in our action plan will be significant, promoting equity, fostering greater collaboration between schools, families and communities, closing the attainment gap and giving all of our children and young people a fair start. We're happy now to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And just before we start, can I just confirm you can still hear me okay? Yeah?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, can I just thank all 5 of you for the considerable amount of effort, time that's gone into this report. Hugely important piece of work, and it was also delivered on time as well, and that's something which we're all hugely appreciative of. Giving our young people a first start is hugely important, and we hear much about levelling up. This is, in my view, the absolute beginning of levelling up in terms of giving young people a first start. I mean, I am proud to come from and privileged to represent a community that is hugely affected by the issues that your report would be making recommendations on. And indeed, earlier today, Mr. Beggs, our Vice Chairman, myself and Mr. Muir visited the boys' model to hear at first hand the challenges that Mrs. Montgomery and her team face at boys' model, but there are challenges that are being absolutely addressed in the most appropriate way, and we'll perhaps hear more about as we go forward. I'm aware that all of you are acutely aware of those challenges because of your expertise and experience, and that's why Minister Weir at the time asked you to serve on this group. So thank you very much, all of you, for all your efforts in producing a report. For me, one of the key things is there are lots of reports, and probably there are lots of shelves somewhere that are bowing with reports around this issue. It is an issue that needs to be tackled long before now. In terms of outputs and outcomes, it's critical that the 47 recommendations that you have made, costing, I think, something like, over the 5-year period, costing something like £187 million. I think that's something which we need to see delivered. So, how can I ask you to start off, and then I will bring colleagues in. How do we make sure that what you want to see, what we want to see, and I've no doubt what your colleagues across education want to see, is actually delivered in reality and not just something in a report?
Well, the first thing I would say is that we would completely agree with your sentiment, Chair. And whenever we were appointed, there was actually quite a lot of criticism of the establishment of yet another group to look at educational underachievement, and it was something that we ourselves were committed to producing a report which would actually bring change, and that was a thread that ran through all of our deliberations and meetings and engagement. And indeed, we've heard this from many of the teachers and parents and community workers that we engaged with throughout the year. I think the difference between this and other previous reports is, first of all, its status, in that it was established through the New Decade New Approach, and we were appointed by the Minister. So that was a cross-party endorsement of the idea of having an expert panel in the first place. Secondly, I think, and this was one of our biggest challenges, we were asked to produce not just a report with some broad sweeping recommendations, and we've had some of those in the past, as you know. We were actually asked to produce an action plan and a costed action plan, which was split up over the first 5 or 6 years of the implementation phase. And that, I can assure you, is a much more challenging task for a panel to come up with. And it took us many hours of deliberation and negotiation and costings coming from government officials to try to produce something which was feasible, which was implementable, and was, I suppose, specific enough, using those SMART targets so that it could actually be delivered on the ground, because too many previous reports made recommendations which I think were well intended, but often very broad and sweeping. So I think our report was different in that regard. And finally, it's different because we recommended this implementation phase, this body, I suppose, to oversee and monitor the implementation. We were adamant about that right from the very start. We spent many hours considering what the best method to ensure the implementation and monitoring and evaluation would be. And I think what we've come up with in terms of the monitoring by the implementation committee chaired by the First Minister and Deputy First Minister should ensure that these actions actually turn into reality. I'll open it up to my colleagues to come in as well.
Yeah, Jackie Redpath here. I'll just support what Noel has said. I think in terms of making this happen, there's two critical factors. One is the will to make it happen, and the second is the finance to make it happen. And on both counts, I think the final chapter of this, which is about interdepartmental working, is really a critical issue. It's not our view either ethically that the Department of Education can do this on their own, nor financially that the Department of Education can do it on their own. And the reason for that is because children don't live their lives in neat departments. They live their lives in many different contexts. And if it doesn't sound counterintuitive, our view would be that you will not effectively address underachievement by focusing solely on underachievement as measured by exams. It has to be, a whole child approach in all the contexts that children live their lives. And if you take that into departmental responsibilities, children's lives run across education, across health, across communities, and other departments. They also live their lives, not only in school but at home and in the streets and in their communities and in clubs. And we need to rally and bring together for greater collective impact, authentic partnerships around children that obviously critically involve schools, but involve those that deal with all the contexts in which they live their lives. So the finance for this and the drive for this needs to come across departments and needs to be led, as Noel said, needs to be led by the First and Deputy First Minister. Otherwise, we fear that it would be constrained to the remit solely that the Department of Education have.
Can I just add, William, because I have the same fears as yourself on reports staying on shelves. We're entering a period now where we're pre-election, and I would like to see First Start high on the agenda in any of the election manifestos and a firm commitment, the same commitment that was given round Northern Ireland Assembly by all political parties, because every one of you in your constituencies have a section of young people who are underachieving. And really, if we are to build, the new Northern Ireland, which we all really want post-pandemic, we want all of our children to succeed. We want them all to be able to apply for the jobs that will be very necessary in society post-pandemic. And the only way to do this is to make sure that we have what you said, William, a levelling up of our society, and that all children, regardless of where they come from, what religion they are, can actually play a huge part in our society. I think it's £180 million price tag, but I would say from my experience both in Derry and in Belfast, it's a price worth paying, and it's a price which is quite cost effective to have a society that we all aspire to.
Okay, I think one of the things that came out this morning when we visited the model was that it's a view that this committee has established over a number of inquiries, not least with the inquiry into the civil service itself, is the failure of government in Northern Ireland to actually cut across in terms of governance across departments. We need to jettison the sort of silo approach that some within the civil service have had to ensure that joined-upness is there and that agility within government, because what Jackie said is absolutely right. The Department of Education isn't going to be able to fund or address these issues on its own. There needs to be a joined-upness across government, and I don't just mean regional government, I mean in terms of local government as well, and those bodies and agencies that are funded to work alongside government around these issues. Because early intervention is both more cost effective and it is more effective in terms, not just in terms of education, but in terms of health, in terms of the judicial and penal system and so on. And we need to learn from that in government. At this stage, I'll wish to bring in other members. Mr. Boylan.
Thank you, Chair, and could I welcome the panel and commend the report. I just want to start off in terms of implementation. I want to break it down to 3 tiers in terms of implementation, and I use it in the context of, I remember back a number of years ago we introduced an autism strategy and an action plan, and we identified all the roles and responsibilities. And I'm just wondering, in terms of your experience in the report and what you've learned, in terms of implementation, could you expand a wee bit on these 3 points? The first one obviously is whether you have a role in terms of the implementation and how you see it being implemented. The second one is in terms of a time frame, and obviously the third one then is no doubt the funding package to deliver that. And I want to put those 3 tiers to that one element, please.
Okay, I'll maybe start off with that. I think in terms of our remit as an expert panel, I mean, as the chair said at the start, we were appointed and invited to produce a report, which we produced on time against all the odds and during a pandemic, and it was published on the 1st of June. So our formal role in the process has ended, but that doesn't mean that our commitment to the implementation of our actions has ended. Far from it, and we as a panel remain 100% committed to seeing the actions put into practice, even though our formal role in that process has ended. But that, I suppose, is even more of a justification for us setting up the monitoring and evaluation structures so carefully within the action plan itself, because we knew that our formal role would end on the 31st of May or the 1st of June. So our formal role has ended. Our commitment to implementation has certainly not ended. In terms of the time frame, well, there are some elements of our action plan which are relatively straightforward to implement, and some things have already been implemented. And I know you had a briefing from the Permanent Secretary and a senior official a couple of weeks ago, so you've heard some of the things which we also have heard have been implemented. Some of the other things, for example, the Reducing Education Disadvantage programme, will take time to establish. We understand that there's been a stakeholder group set up for that, but a lot of the actions that we have put forward rest on co-creation and partnership and the establishment of authentic relationships between communities and government, and that kind of thing actually takes time. So, while of course we would want to see everything expedited and become reality as quickly as possible, we are also aware that some of this does take time to establish. In terms of the funding, well, yes, it is £180 million, I think was the headline that the BBC put out last June. That's the total over 4 or 5 years. The maximum amount per year, I think, is £73 million. And that's really when everything is up and running after 3 or 4 or 5 years. In the initial stages, it's actually much less than that. We understand that there's been a few £1 million, maybe £4 or £5 million set aside during this financial year, ramps up to a few more millions in the second year, and so on. So it's a gradual increase as the programmes become established through partnership and through collaborative approaches.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm interested in, I think it's key yet in terms of the interdepartmental work, and we've seen it. Those of us who've been here for a number of years have seen departments operate in silos, but I'm a keen interest there in one of the points you mentioned about the Children and Young People's Cooperation Act, and I mean there's question marks over whether that's on delivery or not, and I'm just wondering in terms of how do we cross that boundary in terms of ensuring what you brought forward, we're ensuring that all those executive policies are there at the minute, that we can deliver on them using what you brought forward.
Well, I mean, we understand the challenges that government departments face in collaborating. We understand that progress has been made in that regard, and actually through COVID, we heard from many government officials that interdepartmental collaboration improved during the COVID pandemic, and we hope that will be built on moving forward. Yes, we did hear about, of course, the Children's Services Cooperation Act. We are very keen for that to be called into play, and we can only hope that the structure of the implementation board and the biannual reporting into that by government officials will ensure that collaboration continues post-COVID, and to ensure that our actions are actually turned into reality.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Beggs.
Again, thank you very much for your detailed report. Some very good ideas in there. In terms of TSN wards, there is significantly higher levels of absenteeism in many of those wards, and the young people, of course, who are not attending school will not reach their full potential. So, in your report, I can see a number of aspects which would help address that. You talk about better community and parental linkage, and you also talk about the importance of emotional health and well-being. This morning at the Boys Model, we saw a Year 8 well-being class, which I understand happens on a weekly basis, which helps to develop resilience and coping mechanisms and life skills. I'm actually shocked when I saw that, why that doesn't happen in every school. I'm aware that, for instance, there is the citizenship class where you can add things, but I know until recently mental health and well-being has been an area steered away from. So my question is, have you developed a view on well-being classes for every child?
I will, Roy, I'll come in on that question because I was beside you doing an equivalence of head, shoulders, knees and toes in a wellbeing class this morning. But I absolutely think and agree with you that wellbeing needs to be a consideration across every school in Northern Ireland, and I suppose COVID has shone a light very brightly on the need for resources invested in wellbeing, but our report takes cognizance of the fact that children that are coming from socially disadvantaged backgrounds are predisposed to increased levels of mental ill health and difficulties with emotional regulation and so on and so forth. And when we were looking at this from the point of view of our research and producing our report, the Education Authority was well developed in its emotional health and well-being framework and subsequent strategy. And we had good confidence in it, and therefore we haven't spelled out specifics in the report as to what should be done for emotional health and well-being, but we have good faith in the EA strategy that is being rolled out. And in addition to that, SEAR have an Emotional Health and Wellbeing Hub, and they provide resources that are available to schools through that mechanism, and that's a very well-resourced hub. But it's well-resourced, and EA are well-resourced in a response to COVID, as opposed to that having come from a desire to tackle social disadvantage.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Joyce Logue here. I am in the primary sector, and while it is not mandatory that every school will focus lessons on well-being, I think COVID has ensured that every school is focusing on well-being, and our report took cognizance of that. We listened to a lot of leaders, and they had great examples of well-being in the school. And in our report, we promote more nurture units, and I'm from a school with 66% free school meals and climbing. And we don't have a nurture unit, but we have used TSN funding to set up a nurture room in our school and fund that. And I know many other schools are doing that. So if our report is implemented and we get the funding for nurture, that again will address many aspects of well-being, which in turn will lead to better results and better outcomes for our children as they progress through the education system.
This morning then, just back to TSN funding, we were given illustrations of how the TSN funding was spent at the boys model and the positive effect that it's having in terms of the outcome with improved attainment levels. My question around that is, there's relatively little reporting on how TSN funding is being used, and therefore guidance as to where it's working well and where it may not be working well. Is there any reason why everyone isn't asked to simply advise how they're spending TSN funding in order that everyone can learn?
Joyce Logue, again, I'm happy to come in on that. As a principal, TSN became mandatory reporting of it in it wasn't mandatory, it came in 2018, and many schools did not report, as you say. I think there's 6% of schools have reported it for the year 2018-19. And of course, there's a balance here. School leaders, their workload is incredibly heavy. We have recommended in our report that it does become mandatory, and we are aware of the difficulties of that. But this year, as a school leader, I've seen a change in the TSN reporting, and this year I know that many of my colleagues will be reporting on TSN because there was more guidance sent out by DE on it. It was much clearer. There were more letters sent reminding people to report on it. So I'm hopeful that this year, following our report, there will be more reporting of TSN. I'm not sure it'll be 100%, but I think there will be an increase.
Can I just supplement what Joyce has said there? I'm going to add that there's a difficulty with TSN funding because school budgets have been under such pressure. They're running at an equivalent of about 12.5% shortfall over the last 10 years. School leaders are having to be forced to find money wherever they can. So there's a sort of a bit of reluctance to fill in planners and do all those additional jobs whenever the budget itself is so tightened and under so much pressure. But there is absolutely an appetite, I think, as Joyce said, to fill in the TSN planner now. It's much higher profile in people's minds and in people's psyches because of the use of the Engage planner. It's Engage funding, which is much less, has come in to schools with the caveat that you don't get it unless you complete the planner. So
And the Engage is very similar. The Engage planner is very similar to the TSN, so that people, if they have filled out the Engage planner, then it is very straightforward to fill out the TSN. So COVID has helped, and the Engage funding has helped, and hopefully that'll have implications for TSN being filled out.
A final question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Just another sizable additional funding that's available is the SEN funding, which follows statement of pupils. So I'm just wondering, how can this all work together? And in particular, something I raised previously was been reported to me up to 3 classroom assistants standing at the back of a post-primary school, unable to intervene or do anything. They just stand there. Would the panel agree that schools should be given greater flexibility to maximise the use of that funding to benefit the young people?
Without a doubt, sorry, Joyce Logan, I'll be very brief. Without a doubt, I have a classroom with, at present, 4, almost 5 classroom assistants in it, with a class of over 30 children in it. I would much rather have that money that I could decide what is in the best interest of the children, that money is allocated to, that I could allocate that so that I can decide on the best outcomes on the ground for those children.
And I have to say, Roy, you hit the nail on the head about flexibility of funding, because it needs to be something that is considered. And a number of years ago, there was a new initiative with the Boys Model and Hazelwood, and there was a greater flexibility of funding to the schools, and we were able to employ and redeploy classroom assistants and additional specialist teachers. And Mary probably can say more about that.
yes, well, I've spoken about it this morning, but I explained that was quite a struggle, and it's an annual struggle with the Education Authority to negotiate what we call a package of support, as opposed to just an endless number of classroom assistants. And that flexibility to respond to the needs of your pupils in the way that you understand and see as a best fit is vitally important, because Joyce and I just were actually speaking about it earlier, the fact that I have the flexibility to do what I see best fits, whereas Joyce is very much in this silo of give the children more classroom assistants.
Mr. Chair, I'm shocked to hear that can be 4 or 5 classroom assistants standing at the back of classrooms.
Okay. Mr. Muir.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for everyone for joining us here remotely. Just 2 things. We're hearing quite a lot of acronyms around funding. So we've got TSN funding, we've got Engage funding, we've got SEN funding. I'm sure there's other different pots and criteria and reporting and requirements. I'd be interested to know from yourselves, is there now a time to sit back and review all the different funding streams to see if there's one way to harmonise the fundings to school to ensure it's actually going to where it's required? Because I'm just also conscious that there's a myriad of administration and management and reporting around all of this different funding that's coming through from different streams.
Yeah, you're very right. There is a myriad of funding, and it's very time consuming, and we must be accountable for all the funding that we get. And therefore, I think it is important that it is streamlined and that we can allocate at school level that money to where it is most needed, to the pupils most in need.
Yeah, and I think that myriad of funding has to be additional funding, not in place of the normal school budget. It was very prominent in the news last week that pupils in Northern Ireland are funded more poorly than elsewhere in the United Kingdom. And I presume that is a matter of great concern for both the PAC and other members of the Senate.
But I do think it's a good question, because I think it highlights the need for more joined-up thinking, perhaps by government, in terms of the funding streams that are coming into schools and the reporting mechanism, many of which are very different from each other. So if there was any scope for this, even departmental collaboration within the department here around how money is distributed, how it's reported, whether the systems can be cohered to make life easier for very busy school principals, and I think that will be welcomed by all.
Thank you for that. I think we're very good in Northern Ireland, creating lots of different initiatives and reports, but they don't take the time then to then step back and go, where are we? How can we streamline this? And what I saw today was the TSN funding being used in a very targeted fashion. But some of that was being used for stuff which you would traditionally consider to be in the remit of health, in terms of mental health. So there is that need for that collaboration, which I think is a real issue here in Northern Ireland. How our government is structured. Our government is structured that incentivises departments not to work together. There's no legal requirement to work together, and I think the impact is upon the people. But I'm going to come on another issue. So before we left the school this morning, we obviously took part and visited the class in relation to emotional resilience and well-being. And what I saw there was a class of a number of boys very well turned out, engaging within the activities with staff, including also some people who came in externally, actively, and building a rapport with the young boys, and it was really inspiring to see that. One thing I'm conscious of is that those young boys, when they arrive into that school at approximately 9 o'clock, they then leave later on in the day and they go back into the community. So the school is part of the community, and to me the key issue around this here is about those relationships with the community to ensure that their experience is 365, 24/7, about supporting them to reach their fullest potential. And I wanted to really ask the question, what are the challenges in terms of engaging with the local communities to help in achieving what you're trying to get? I saw examples where that can occur, but I want to know where are the challenges and what more do we need to do to try to help yourselves from the education community to build those better relationships with communities?
From a school's point of view, I'll hand over to Jackie, he's our expert on community, but from a school's point of view, engagement with the community is essential, and there is so much expertise and such resource in the community that's funded in different ways that schools can tap into. But again, it goes back to a point that I made to you earlier on today. I'm trained as a history teacher. There's very limited training for me as a school leader, and there's certainly no training for me about how to deal with the problems that result as a consequence of social disadvantage. And our report very much looks at preparing school leadership to properly tackle problems in the context in which they find themselves. And in that context of social disadvantage, community is gold. Involvement with the community, a wraparound approach. You're right, they're only in school from 9 to 3:20. In the evenings, at the weekends, there are the children, there are their families, and there are so many social problems that wrap around that family that there needs to be connectivity with the community in order to address that.
And I think, Jackie Redpath here, and you're breaking up a little in the questions and comments that you're making, so sort of interpreting what you said, so I hope I answer it properly. Following on from what Mary said, one of the very early figures we were given by the Department of Education was that a child between the age of 4 and 18 spends only 13% of its waking hours in school. So 87% of a child's life is spent in other contexts, much of it at home or in youth clubs or in uniformed organisations or in the street or wherever. And unless we get all those contexts working together, especially for children that carry issues and that are disadvantaged, then we will not, schools can't do this job on their own. They obviously have a massive role to play, but we need to bring together in an authentic partnership all those contexts in which children live their lives and to get collective action around agreed goals. And that requires partnership working. Now, there is an issue about the resources that exist in the community and, for example, in youth work, which is a vital support in relation to this and in other fields. So that's something to be looked at, but that is why this needs to go, right across departments. And we need departments to cohere their efforts, as well as those of us that are on the ground cohering our efforts. and it can be done in what we've called the place-based approach, because underachievement largely manifests itself in particular places and in particular communities. And it's possible to identify those places and communities. In rural areas, it's more dispersed, and that requires a different approach. But in urban areas and in towns, it manifests itself clearly in certain places, and that's where we need to go to cohere this partnership approach. And I think from a community perspective, we're talking about where you get that partnership, you're talking about a backbone organisation leading it, which may well be a school, but it could be a big voluntary organisation, or it could be a community organisation. But whoever leads on that authentic partnership, for all the partners, there needs to be agreed outcomes and agreed approach. And I believe that approach can break the back of this issue, and it can break it, over the length of time that we have projected here, which is 5 years.
I have to say, working both in North Belfast and in Derry, it's obvious when the community work with the school and in partnership with the school, you really can make a big difference in addressing underachievement and disadvantage. The first start report deals with community and community mentors, community leadership, but that needs to happen at all levels within all communities, both urban and rural, and that is a particular challenge for us.
Just one last brief question. One of the things I see that should and could be a bridge between schools and the community is the Board of Governors on a school, because they're meant to be representative of the community. And in your experience, are a Board of Governors being used maybe to their fullest potential to bridge those relationships with the community?
I'm afraid I didn't catch that question. I wonder, can you ask that again, Andy?
Yeah, it's just really whether Board of Governors are being fully used for their relationship with the local communities.
I have to say, Andrew, as a Board of Governor in a school, it depends on the particular school, whether you actually are used. But I think Boards of Governors are great untapped resources in our schools, and you will see you point in the report to training and more targeted training of governance in schools, because many of our schools have very good governors, but there is really an issue in recruitment of governors, and fast recruitment of governors. You can have names into the department, and 6 months later those people are not approved as voting members of governors, so that is really an issue for us in governance in schools around Ireland.
Andrew, can I just come in there? I'm in a school, and I know our local schools, we have proactively sought governor members from the community because of the wealth of experience that they can bring in and of the links they can make to improving outcomes for our children in the school. But as Kathleen says, I think there's a lot of work to be done in the recruiting of governors and the training of governors, and that's outlined in our report.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I just a few questions in relation to your recommendations, if you don't mind. You may be aware this committee did a significant inquiry into special educational needs at the start of the year, and we hope to have the Chief Executive of the Education Authority in front of us in early December to see how they're implementing many of the recommendations that we made. But can I ask, how will SEN factor in the action plan? Because it is so critical, given that early intervention is so critical, both in terms of money being a limited resource and the early intervention in terms of the child, the family, the classroom, the teachers, classroom assistants and so on.
Okay. Well, again, you're breaking up a little bit, but if it's a question around SEN and its importance in this, SEN, of course, is crucially important in education and educational underachievement. And we do talk about SEN, and in particular we talk about SEN in key area 1 around early years, where we heard from many stakeholders about the importance of early identification and assessment of children who currently are being missed, either in the 0 to 3 age group before they come into preschool year, or even during that preschool year. And so some of the recommendations that we make in key area 1 are precisely around developing and investing in assessment, intervention and support services for younger children with developmental delay, which might indicate a special educational need. And also that the early years SEN inclusion service should be expanded and enhanced. So it's not that we have turned our attention away from SEN, far from it. As an SEN lecturer here at Stranmillis, I believe that the key element of this is actually early identification and assessment. We're also aware, and we were made aware in meetings that we had with the Education Authority, that there are significant reviews and reforms underway by the Education Authority, and we have noted in the commentary in our report that we would wish to see that review and the recommendations of those audit office reviews and so on that have happened in the past. We would want to see those recommendations acted on as quickly as possible. But I must say we were encouraged by what we heard, but as school leaders around the panel, there was certainly an encouragement for the Education Authority to deliver on their promises to improve services to children and young people.
In terms of targeting social needs, this morning we heard from Mary that the boys' model receives 350,000 when there are, I think, 1,079 pupils. That equates to £324 per pupil, slightly over that. Given that Gary Fair gave the news to the Education Committee yesterday that there is £350 million needed, and that Michelle McElveen asked for £80 million from the Finance Minister, and I think was allocated £20 million extra. In terms of the money going forward, we do need to ensure, and Kathleen was quite right in terms of the manifestos, talk is cheap, but it takes money to buy whiskey. We need to ensure that the politicians actually deliver on this, because it is so important for the individual child and their family and our community, but it is good for Northern Ireland PLC that money is provided. So I do think it's important that the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister are bought into this. We will play our role as best we can in terms of this inquiry and in terms of our report in ensuring that that joined-upness that is so much needed actually happens. Because if that joined-upness isn't there, we won't actually be able to achieve what you want to achieve. And we, I think, collectively fully endorse the 47 recommendations, and our parties obviously did in the Assembly. I don't think any of us are spokespersons on education, but nevertheless we all represent constituencies, and many of us sit on boards of governors and our fathers or grandfathers. So I think it's hugely important that verbalisation is actually supported in terms of pounds, shillings and pence in terms of delivery. The other thing I wanted to ask then is a key issue around all of this is leadership. Jackie made a point earlier on where he said there needs to be a will and there needs to be finance, and he's absolutely right. The third thing I would throw in is there needs to be leadership. And I'm not going to go into schools or names or whatever, but I've sat in boards of governors or been aware of schools in my constituency where their leadership has been better than others. And obviously, in terms of Mrs O'Hare and Mrs Montgomery, you have two excellent leaders who served in excellent schools in North Belfast and made a vital difference, and in Mary's case continues to do so at the school. Kathleen now in other fields. But that leadership is crucial, and if we don't have that leadership, no matter how much will is there, no matter how much money is there, it will not happen. We will not see the change that we need. How can we make sure the leadership is there? Can that be done? Governors have a role, but even that's limited in reality, and I've seen that from my own experience.
Well, if I could just kick this off, I had the privilege of leading schools in Northern Ireland for 16 years. I was very fortunate when I started off as a leader. There was a professional qualification in headship. There is no such qualification now, and I think that is a real difficulty because the qualification firstly inspired you to become a head teacher. And you know, if I look at my job when I applied for it first, there were 18 candidates applying for it. There are very, very few people applying to be leaders in schools. So I really think we need to address, and this report does point to that, we need to have training for head teachers. We need, I suppose, well-being support for head teachers after that horrible day when something happens. You know, through my career, I've had deaths of students, I've had deaths of, colleagues as well, and you just have had bad days because of what's happening out in the community. There needs to be both training and support of leadership, and we also need a more consistent approach to the appointment of leadership positions in our schools. And leadership, you're a leader of a particular type of school. I think boards of governors need that training in the appointment of a leader for their area. We all know situations where head teachers have been appointed to positions in schools, a wonderful leader, but not for that area. You need to really fit into the area where you are appointed. And I think that the recommendations on our report go back to that importance of inspiring leadership, training for leadership, and then for those people who've been in it for some time, sustaining leadership in schools. Because the year I left, which was 2018, quite a number of my colleagues left as well. And I have to say that was very much about, burnout. We didn't wait to retirement age, we left because the situation in schools and the support needed for leadership in schools needs to be something that is recognised.
Okay.
I think it's fair to add as well that during last year we met a very large number of truly inspirational school leaders. And I'm not just talking about the 3 inspirational school leaders that I worked with on the panel last year, but we met a large number of really fantastic principals. But one of the things that struck me was that they were inspirational, successful principals despite the system, not because of the system, and despite a lack of training and support and guidance that was made available to them, not because of it. And that's something that really struck me as not a school principal, and it's something that I think really fed into the recommendations and actions that we put forward that would address that issue and provide greater consistency so that all of our school leaders in challenging circumstances could be supported and guided and encouraged and even challenged to be more effective school leaders.
And can I also say that Education Authority are providing more courses of recent to train would-be leaders up and the steps to leadership and the pathways to leadership. And they're also providing courses for leaders in the Leadership Matters Achieve programme. And they're about to embark on the encouraging leaders now to apply for the Association of Educational Advisors. So things are being addressed, and we have encouraged that through the Fair Start programme. It is essential that it is addressed. As Kathleen says, the applicants for headship are decreasing rapidly.
Okay, Mr. Hilditch.
Thank you, Chair, and folks are very welcome this afternoon. Just a few questions there in relation to, well, firstly, social deprivation and what the lay person sees as social deprivation. Is it where the school is it where pupils live, or is it are you happy with the free school meals as being the identifier of social deprivation within the education system?
Well, one of the actions that we have put forward, David, is actually that the Department of Education would fund a review of the free school meal proxy measure for social disadvantage or income disadvantage. Not because we're convinced that there's necessarily a better alternative, but simply because it is used so universally as the measure and as the sort of threshold for access to additional funding. And it's been a long time since that was really reviewed. We're aware that in other parts of the UK, they use slight variations on the free school meal measure, perhaps including children who have ever been on a free school meal register rather than just those who are currently on it. And we're also aware that there's this sort of cliff edge approach in free school meal funding, that those who just pass the threshold get the funding, those who miss it by a few pounds don't receive it at all, and there might be other approaches. Another approach, of course, is to look at the geographical area, to look at the multiple deprivation indexes and so on. There are shortcomings to that as well, but we have asked the department to lead a review just to make sure that that as a measure is still the most appropriate. I'm personally not convinced that there are many better alternatives out there, but I think it's important that we look at it again, or that the department looks at it again, to make sure that it's still fit for purpose.
Okay, thank you. On the schools themselves, then, the sort of the physical facilities, the fabric of schools, and I look at my own constituency, and I see window frames falling out. I'm looking at buckets and corridors and various things. And did you see a link to maybe pupil confidence, enthusiasm, and indeed absenteeism through some of these issues, whereby the fabric of the schools is not good?
I think you're going to have to repeat that, David, maybe closer to the mic. We didn't catch that at all.
All right. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah.
Yep. No, I was looking at the fabric, the physical fabric and facilities of a school. Did you see any link to potentially pupil confidence or lack of it, or enthusiasm or lack of it, or indeed absenteeism connected to the actual facilities that they're being taught in not being good enough?
Yeah.
David, I started my career as a principal in a school with concrete cancer, and ended the career in that school in a £20 million new build. And if I could just say yes, 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 the infrastructure of the school, particularly in areas of disadvantage, is key, because it tells you how you value your pupils. If you're bringing them into poor buildings, and you are saying, this is how we value you, and that's not to say that fantastic work has been done in schools that are actually falling down. But we did have people from the department talking to us about the structure, and many of our schools have actually been built with success in mind. In the build I was involved in, I was lucky enough to look at buildings in other parts of the world and see how they built them in building success and confidence and self-esteem. And if you ever visit St. Cecilia's in Derry, you will actually have that very much in mind when you actually walk in the door. But the commitment to infrastructure in schools in England is key. And to be honest, when you looked at not the post-primary estate as much, but when you looked at the primary estate, and I have to say, particularly in areas of the Shankill, there needs to be a rethink in how infrastructure says value to our young people.
Okay, thank you. Just on best practice then, is there any international best practice contained within the report that you've introduced?
International best practice?
Well, I mean, all of the evidence that we gathered was on an international basis. So if you take, for instance, the Heckman curve that we talk about in key area 1, which is around investment in the early years, I mean, that's based on an international model and evidence from other countries across the world. And in a way, I think we've fallen behind there compared to many other countries. Other countries, I think, have invested more heavily in the early years and have been doing that for a period of time. What we're recommending in our report is that we catch up on some of those other countries that have recognised the importance of early years, recognised the importance of 0 to 3, not just the statutory school age starting at 3 or 4, but actually the 0 to 3 age group as well, and investing heavily in there. Because as we prove in the commentary in our report as well, that investment in the early years brings huge dividends further down the line.
And if I could just say, if we're catching the question right, that has got the greatest emphasis in our report, that whole area of early years, and the returns from that will be massive. There is a need to create a seamless pathway for a child from before birth right through those early years and in the early school years. And that path should be seamless, and there should be support at every stage that is available, especially for children in disadvantaged areas. And for me, one of the gems that we have is our Sure Start programme. The Department of Education are to be commended that they have invested again this year a 6% rise, I believe, in the budget of Sure Start. So it's good, because Sure Start was lost in England and we have retained it. Nevertheless, it's important that Sure Start has the capacity to deliver on what it needs to, and in all the other settings, by the way, including daycare, and particularly daycare that young children and babies are in. One of the biggest things that we believe could be done, and it's in the report and one of our actions, is to expand the 2-year-old programme that exists at the moment in a limited way, to expand that to children and a targeted developmental programme for 2-year-olds. Nursery school principals would tell us that they can't tell a child coming into nursery school that has benefited from a 2-year-old programme. And if I, from my point of view, was looking at one of the single biggest things and achievable things we can do, would be to expand that 2-year-old programme in early years.
And one final point, and that is that we did have a session with some officials from the Republic of Ireland, and that was a very fruitful session. And unfortunately, we didn't have time in our very compressed time period or time frame to spend longer with them. But I would strongly encourage officials here to look south of the border, look at the DESH system, where they have some really innovative and well evaluated interventions there. For example, the homeschool liaison officer that we mentioned, we don't go as far as mandating it because we want a place-based partnership approach, but there are a number of elements certainly in what's happening south of the border and indeed in other parts of the UK, because we met with officials from Scotland and Wales and England, and I would strongly encourage the officials in the implementation phase to continue those links, to develop those links, to learn from best practice, as your question suggests, and not just within the UK, but further afield.
Okay, thank you. And finally, go back to where we started and the potential of reports gathering dust on shelves. Is there a role for the panel going forward, or is that your work finished, or is there potential for you to be of a monitoring value?
Well, that's a difficult question for us to answer. Our official role, as I said at the start, our formal role has finished. We were established to produce a report, and our commitment remains to it, but our formal role has officially ended. That's not to say that we would be opposed to any future involvement, I'm sure, time permitting, but our official role finished on the 1st of June with the publication of the report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I just return to the issue of collaboration? And just reading in terms of the report, Kathleen, Mary and Jackie will be aware of the Sami Now Shine Forum in Greater Shankill, which basically is a voluntary coming together of professionals such as Greater Shankill Integrated Services, Extern, politicians, the schools in terms of the leadership from each of the sort of the main schools, uniformed organisations, the police, government agencies, voluntary agencies, and so on, where there is no budget, there's no money, but it's a coming together in an umbrella organisation about information sharing, engagement, and a support structure, a mechanism for people to talk about that. And Kathleen and Mary have attended those in the past. I think that sort of thing, which happened because of people coming together, not because of any government pushing it or whatever. I think that sort of thing is a useful pilot for the sharing of information, because you've got the professionals there, you've got the teachers there with the pressures that are ongoing, including some primary school principals who've reported, unfortunately, young people needing professional help and counselling as well. The reason I mention that is this. At that forum over the years, and I made this point this morning, and I've made this point both in the Education Committee and in this committee, too often schools are having to use frontline education money to buy in professional help. A greater joined-upness has to be something which we see coming out of this report to ensure that the Department of Health, the Public Health Agency, Department of Communities or wherever step up to the plate and help address these issues, because these are not issues that the schools can address themselves. There are societal issues that require a multi-agency approach, and that also includes the parental help and support and guidance, if it's there, and sadly in many homes it isn't there, but in other things like churches, uniformed and youth organisations and so on. So I think that sort of collaborative approach that was adopted in Greater Shankill. There's also TAMI, which operates in another part of North Belfast as well, which gives great leadership. I'm not aware of any other member who's signalled that they have questions to ask. Can I just again thank you all very much for your time this afternoon, for your dedication and commitment during your time working on the report and the production of an excellent report, as I've said earlier, on time, and it's now up for all of us to make sure that the 47 recommendations are put in place for the benefit of our young people, and that the money is found to ensure it happens. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Purdy, Jackie, Kathleen, Mary, and
Joyce.
I was going to call you by your surname, but I couldn't quite recall your Christian name. So thank you all very much. Your report is invaluable, and it's important that we see this as a key part of our inquiry, and we will make sure that it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your support.
Before I basically excuse our guests, to Mr. Allen or Mr. Stevenson, have you any questions or comments you want to make?
No, just echo your sentiments, Chair. We have, as an office, we've liaised directly with the expert panel. My colleague Patrick Barr, who's not with us today, has enjoyed some conversations with Dr. Purdy, which have been very much appreciated, and will reflect the sentiments of the expert panel and the committee in our further work on your inquiry. Thank you.
Okay. And Stuart, have you anything you want to add? Comment to make?
No, Chair, nothing from me from an accounts perspective, but obviously I noticed the comments again on funding, and I'll look back to my colleagues.
Is it no pressure on you, Stuart? They're only looking for 187 million over 5 years. Okay. Okay, folks, thank you very much, and enjoy the weekend when it comes. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay, members, with your permission, we'll go into closed session.
Agreed.
Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound.